Good. And we're going to discuss a very interesting man, similar to your educational background today, the Comte derlon, or do you want to pronounce his given name?
Yeah, Jean-Baptiste Drouet, the Comte derlon.
Okay. And very talented general, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, very much so. One of maybe the unsung generals of Napoleon, and certainly one of the interesting characters of the period.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. I just did an episode on General Foy, and he was another one of those who's kind of the unsung generals. The marshals get all the publicity, but there were some really talented generals working under them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's dive in. Derlon was born in July 1765 in is it
Roms.
Reims? That's right. I don't want to say Reims as I read it literally. Not to be confused with another future general, Antoine Drouet. What do we know of Derlon's upbringing?
So Jean-Baptiste Derlon, Drouet Derlon, is born into a kind of family of tradesmen. His antecedents are carpenters. His father's a master carpenter, so they're commoners, but they're reasonably well off. He is apprenticed to be a locksmith at quite an early age, so not quite following in his father's footsteps, but he's going to be a respectable tradesman, a worthy enough profession. But then in 1782, at the age of 17, he decides he wants a bit of adventure and goes and joins the army.
Yeah, he enters the army as a basic private in 1782 and is later discharged after 5 years of service. He then re-enters in 1792, which is basically in the midst of the French Revolution. And it seems to me that a lot of Napoleon's future generals enter the army at this time. Is that because of the opportunity to rise through the ranks based on merit, or are they just looking for a job?
Partially it might be, but I think there's a lot of patriotism around at the time as well. The revolution sparks off a huge sentiment in France of patriotism that isn't just for France the country, but is for this idea of more popular government and of every citizen doing their bit to support that. So in 1791, during peacetime, there's a huge volunteering push from the government to get men into the army. And it's responded to with enormous enthusiasm across France. There are some problems in some areas, but there is huge enthusiasm. In 1792, they do that again. And then, of course, when the war breaks out, again, they send an appeal for volunteers and thousands of men join up. So there's this spirit of patriotism, of wanting to volunteer to do one's bit for the country, as well as, maybe slightly more personal motives of wanting to have a sense of adventure or having a taste for military life, or indeed the prospect of promotion. So a lot of those men who joined in 1791, 1792 will have been swept up in this revolutionary fervor and probably at the same time thought, this is my chance to get some excitement in life or follow my military inclinations.
Indeed. And Derlon becomes a captain in 1793, so he's moving up the ranks, and he soon becomes an aide-de-camp to future Marshal Lefebvre. I know Marshal Soult also served under Lefebvre. It seems like the old man Lefebvre knew how to train his officers, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. He's got a couple of really big names who serve under him. Derlon actually mentions in his memoirs where he meets Lefebvre. The two of them are both actually captains at the same time. Derlon is named captain in April of 1793 to a pretty ragtag bunch of volunteers, and they're posted to the same cantonment as Lefebvre, who's another captain, and the two hit it off straight away. They become friends of the same rank. But Lefebvre has this meteoric rise. Once Hoche arrives at the army, he appoints Lefebvre as adjutant general, then a general of brigade, then general of division, all within a few months, while Derlon remains being a captain. But Derlon very much looks up to Lefebvre. He says in his memoirs that Lefebvre, even in these early days when he's just a captain, is showing an incessant solicitude for his soldiers. So he's looking after these soldiers. He says he has immense personal bravery. He also later says, after he's appointed Derlon as aide-de-camp, Derlon says that Lefebvre guided the first steps in my career with his counsels. So it seems that Lefebvre is a bit of a mentor to his staff officers. He also clearly listens to them, which is quite interesting. You expect an army to be giving orders, but Lefebvre encourages them to plan, to think for themselves, to make suggestions, to reconnoiter and come back with a suggestion of what to do. And derlon tells a story of how he concocted a plan to get the army across the Rhine. So this is a junior staff officer, a captain, who's gone to reconnoiter, who's come up with this plan to get the entire army across the river. And Lefebvre listens to him and then champions this plan to Kellerman, who adopts it. And they carry this out and it works. And it's this kind of mentoring, I think, that Lefebvre seems to have been quite good at. He maybe wasn't the finest of Napoleon's marshals, but I think he's quite a humane man. And I do wonder if that humanity and that human element does help him to nurture people like derlon, like Soult, to really blossom in their own right.
Indeed. Yeah, it's interesting that unlike, say, the Duke of Wellington, who didn't seek out or need or want counsel from his junior officers, that Lefebvre kind of welcomed that.
Yeah, absolutely. It may be a reflection that he himself had uncertainties and insecurities. Later in his career, he certainly doesn't always succeed. But I think there's a humane element to Lefebvre that allows him to nurture these officers and help their careers along.
Yeah, indeed, and we'll kind of come back to that point where they were close friends. But in 1799, derlon is promoted to brigadier general and serves in the pivotal Battle of Zurich, where the French defeat the Russians under future Marshal Massena. He also serves in another major victory in 1800 at Hohenlinden under Moreau. Seems like he was very talented as an officer, this derlon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he moves through the ranks of the staff quite quickly. By February 1798, he's Lefebvre's chief of staff. He was actually meant to go to Egypt with Kleber as chief of staff, but he received his orders too late, and the expedition had gone. So he goes back to Lefebvre, and then is passed over basically when Lefebvre gives up his command. Derlon remains with the division, and Souham takes over, and he seems to have been really highly regarded. Massena, when he takes over the army, gives him a series of semi-independent commands. Puts him in charge of a brigade here, a division there, an outpost. He uses him to reconnoiter a lot. Derlon is seen as a pretty solid officer. Maybe not a great commander at this point. He hasn't got a huge amount of experience of leading bodies of troops, but he's very much seen as someone with a bit of tactical nous, with common sense for a soldier, and someone who will do his duty.
Interesting. What was his personal life like? I know he got married in the 1790s.
Yeah, he marries in 1794 Marianne de Rousseau, I believe, who I think may have already been his sister-in-law, or the sister of his sister-in-law. But they seem to be happily enough married. I don't know a huge amount about his personal life, but they certainly have 3 children spread over about 8 to 10 years. I suspect because he's away on campaigns so often. But they seem to have a happy enough marriage. She dies before him in 1828. But he has a reasonably happy domestic life, although he does end up spending, as many officers do, spending a lot of it apart.
Yeah, and again, he's on the front lines in 1805 and 1806 for the major victories at Austerlitz and Jena over the Austrians, Russians, and Prussians. And in 1807, he is chief of staff to his old mentor Lefebvre at the successful siege of Danzig. I mean, how unprecedented that you're not only like on the field for these victories, but you're like leading men in these victories.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage of the Napoleonic Wars, he's one of a handful of officers of general rank who are at the forefront of the fighting in this kind of seemingly unconquerable army, this series of victories. He commands Bernadotte's 2nd Division in 1805, so he fights at Austerlitz. He does well there. He actually misses Jena Auerstedt because Bernadotte dallies for the whole day and doesn't arrive at either battlefield. But he takes part in the pursuit. He does well when he actually encounters the Prussians. And in early 1807, when he is transferred back to be Lefebvre's chief of staff, he pretty much masterminds the fall of Danzig as well. And he then becomes Land's chief of staff as well for Friedland. And he's one of these, this group of generals, which you can include, Davout's 3 immortals. You can include, half a dozen who go on to big commands in the peninsula or get promoted to Marshal later. But this suite of generals who has this this huge wave of success. And like you say, it's not just being present, but it's actually leading men into the thick of action. And I suspect he really comes of age as a commander in 1805 to 7.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, after the 1807 victory at Friedland, he's famously made Count derlon by Napoleon. And a few years later, this is a tricky part. He's again serving under Marshal Lefebvre and pacifying the Tyrol rebellion. It seemed like a walkover for the French army, but it wasn't. Can you kind of tell us what happened there?
Yeah, so this is kind of when Austria comes back into the war against France in 1809. Tyrol rises up, and Marshal Lefebvre is sent with a division of Bavarians to put down an uprising. So the area that we're talking about is around Innsbruck in Austria nowadays, the Tyrol, quite mountainous, quite difficult terrain. And the Tyrolese do not want the Bavarians there. They don't want the French there. They're essentially supporting Austria. And Lefebvre is expected to crush the rebels quite quickly, but he has real trouble doing so. He does okay at Eckmühl, Lefebvre, when he's fighting kind of, in open warfare. But then when he goes into Tyrol, he doesn't get on well with his Bavarian troops, which doesn't help. He can't really get a handle on the situation. He can't really pin down this semi-guerrilla force that he's fighting against. And although he manages to beat them a couple of times, he can't crush this uprising. Eventually, unfortunately for him, he is defeated in battle by the Tyrolese, and Napoleon loses his temper and replaces Lefebvre with derlon.
Yeah, that must have been a hard moment for derlon, to see his mentor sent packing after getting sacked by Napoleon, but now he's on the scene as commander. And how does he rise to the challenge?
Yeah, it must be a bittersweet moment. He's given his first independent command here, but it's at the expense of his friend and mentor, Lefebvre. But derlon rises to the challenge relatively well. He benefits from a couple of things that Lefebvre didn't. One, he gets on better with the Bavarians. He hasn't fallen out with them quite so much. And two, Austria has been knocked out of the war. So Austria is no longer able to support this uprising. So derlon is able to concentrate more forces against the Tyrolese, whose supporters are kind of drifting away. So by November, he basically manages to corner and crush the remaining rebels or remaining resistors, and reimpose or impose French control over this territory.
Okay. Well, after that success for derlon, he's dispatched to the Peninsula War and serves there for several years. And I know Spain and Portugal were kind of a graveyard for many reputations of Napoleon's generals. How did he perform?
He doesn't actually do too badly in the peninsula. Almost every general that goes there comes out with a reputation dented, damaged in some way. But derlon comes out of it having shown a good degree of tactical sense, an ability to organize a corps, so a larger unit than he'd really been in charge of before. By 1813, he shows he's capable of semi-independent command. He fights a couple of battles there where they normally come out second, don't do so well, but he personally leads his men quite well. He spends most of his time actually down with Soult in Andalusia, rather than against Wellington. So he's maybe helped by the fact that he doesn't encounter Wellington too frequently during his stay there.
Right. I know he famously defeats British General Hill at the Battle of Maya in 1813, one of the few victories over the British in the later stages of the war.
Yeah, absolutely. So after Vittoria, where derlon commands about a third of the French army, which doesn't go so well, the French basically launch a series of counterattacks in the Pyrenees. And at one of these, derlon leads his men forward to attack the British 2nd Division. And then when the 7th Division helps them, derlon attacks them as well. And at the end of the day, he is left as master of the battlefield. He loses more men than the British, but he is left master of the field. So he shows here a degree of tactical nous. He certainly shows his attacking instincts. He's a good motivator. He's a good leader. He's a good tactician. Because levering the British out of these positions, even if you do outnumber them, is not easy. These are veteran British divisions. So at Maya in 1813, in July of 1813, he shows himself to be a good, solid commander at the very least.
Absolutely. But unfortunately, as we all know, it's not enough, and the British push on to Toulouse, and Napoleon loses Paris, so he has to abdicate in April 1814. Derlon pledges allegiance to the returning Bourbon monarchy, but quickly rallies to Napoleon's flag when he returns from Elba. Now, this next part, I think it's a mountain out of a molehill, but I'll let you be the judge. In the 1815 dual battles of Ligny and Quatre Bras against the Allies, can you briefly summarize what happens to Derlon and his First Corps?
The Derlon, in charge of First Corps, has been deputed to be part of the left of the French army. So this is the part of the French army given to Marshal Ney on the 15th. Derlon is in the second line. Rye's Second Corps is with Ney at the front. Derlon is behind. On the morning of the 16th, he's given orders to close up with Ney and support him. And he's marching towards the Quatre Bras battlefield when one of Napoleon's aides, Lefebvre, arrives and says, Napoleon needs you. No, the Emperor needs your troops. And basically redirects Derlon off towards the Ligny battlefield. And Derlon thinks, no, if Napoleon's given this command, I best obey it. So off he goes.
Right, and Napoleon's winning that battle at Ligny. He just needs Derlon's corps to crush them, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the idea that Napoleon just needs one more corps to come around, basically crush the Prussians from the Prussian right, the French left, and he will destroy Blucher's army. Not just beat it, but destroy it. And so Derlon marches off to do this. But Marshal Ney, who has been given command of Derlon's corps the day before as part of his left wing, he needs troops at Quatre Bras. So he, when he hears what Derlon's doing, is furious, sends another officer off and says, look, I'm your immediate commander. I order you back here. I need you at Quatre Bras. Derlon receives this message when he's a couple of miles from the Ligny battlefield. And he stops his corps, and he doesn't know what to do. He has a slight disagreement with his leading divisional commander, Drouet, who's in charge of 4th Division. And they decide basically what they'll do is leave 4th Division and the cavalry at Ligny to support the Emperor and march everyone else back to Quatre Bras.
Okay.
Unfortunately,
I mean, I don't know who's to blame here, but I'll let you finish the story, and I guess we can assess who's to blame.
I mean, unfortunately, in the event, Drouet and Jacquinot, in charge of the cavalry, don't do anything at Ligny that's useful, and Derlon arrives at Quatre Bras too late to do anything there. So this entire corps of 20,000 men spend the day vacillating between two battlefields and contributing to neither.
So, again, my original thesis that it's a mountain out of a molehill because, Napoleon would have lost Waterloo against the 7th Coalition anyways. But if we have to assign blame to someone for this snafu, who would it be?
I'm going to blame Napoleon for it for the simple reason that he redesigns his command of the army on the 15th of June by giving Ney 2 corps, Rye's and Derlon's corps. And then on the 16th, he completely ignores this reorganization, summons Derlon without communicating with Ney. Now, it's possible that Napoleon himself was trying to communicate with Ney and that de la Bedouire, the staff officer, exceeded his remit in redirecting Derlon before consulting Ney. But it's the organization of the army that's at fault, and I'm afraid the book has to stop with the army commander. I don't think Derlon did much wrong, because quite simply, if you receive orders from the Emperor, you don't disobey them. And if you receive orders from your immediate commander, who is saying, I'm going to lose a battle without you, you don't disobey them. So he's put in an impossible position, perhaps. Maybe an unpopular thing to say that the book stops with Napoleon, but I think it does in this case.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with you. I mean, now, Monday morning quarterback, whatever you want to call it, maybe he could have split 10,000 men in each direction, or maybe he should just picked one battlefield and been, worried about the aftermath later. But yeah, it's tough to say Derlon did the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't disobey orders from Napoleon, so maybe he should have just committed at Ligny. But equally, he's probably thinking, well, I'm going to get shot if Ney is overrun at Quatre Bras because I've gone walkabout.
Right. Okay, well, a few days after that, the famous Battle of Waterloo occurs. How does derlon and First Corps perform?
Well, Waterloo for them, they are designated as the main French attack at the start of this battle. Uh, First Corps has the biggest untouched part of the French army, 20,000 men who've barely fired a shot during this campaign. They've got 4 full divisions of infantry. So of the 2 frontline corps, first and second, they've got the most infantry, and so they're ordered in for the first main attack of the day. We've got the action around Hougomont, which is basically a distraction, and then derlon is ordered in against the Allied centre left. He advances in 4 enormous divisional columns, and these columns are in a very strange formation. It's 8 battalions, one behind the other, each battalion in a single line of 3 ranks.
Mm-hmm.
A very odd formation that hadn't been used before, really, and there's no clarity as to who decided on that, whether it was derlon or Ney or Napoleon. But derlon's attack is a major threat to the Allies. 16,000 infantry supported by a couple of thousand cavalry, by a grand battery of 60 to 80 guns. This is a bludgeon to smash the Allies out the way, and it almost works.
Yeah, our friend General Picton is killed, correct, during this onslaught.
Yeah, absolutely. The 4 divisions advance in echelon. The 1st division threatens La Haye Sainte in the middle of the battlefield, and then begins to push back the Allied troops at the crossroads. 2nd division pushes back Byron's brigade, which is heavily outnumbered. Picton then counterattacks, drives 1st and 2nd division back slightly, is only struggling to hold 3rd division. Derlon at this stage is on the brink of a breakthrough. If 3rd division could just keep on going, they'll push through the thin line of Picton, who is now dead. He's been shot. He's gone. There's no leadership. There are no infantry reserves behind them. Unfortunately, of course, as we know, unfortunately from derlon's point of view, the Earl of Uxbridge, the Allied cavalry commander, then launches forward his 2 brigades of British heavy cavalry. The Union Brigade especially, who smash into these attacking infantry who are disoriented. They're advancing through smoke. They've had a hard fight across the valley. They're out of alignment. They're in no position to face cavalry, and they are overrun.
Yeah.
And this attack is not just beaten, it's destroyed. 3 of his divisions are routed and sent back across the valley. They lose about 5,000 men, so nigh on a third of their infantry strength goes in this attack. But it's a credit to derlon, because he launches the counterattack. He goes back, he finds his cavalry division, he orders them to counterattack, and that combined with a counterattack ordered by Napoleon of the cuirassiers, drives back the British cavalry and destroys them. And derlon then rallies his corps, 2nd and 4th divisions, mostly some survivors of 1st and 3rd, but derlon then leads them forward again. He does manage to capture La Haye Sainte in the middle of the battlefield. He does put pressure on the British or Allied lines, mostly British troops by this stage, with Lambert's division that's come in, and the remains of Picton's division. And he does support the attack of the Imperial Guard.
Yeah. And I don't think people realize how close, Ney and derlon were to winning this battle. They captured La Haye Sainte, like you said. Horse artillery was tearing up British infantry, and I think it was closer than most people realize.
Yeah, absolutely. While everyone looks over on the kind of center right of the battlefield and where the guards are, and thinks that that's where the real battle is, derlon still had the chance maybe to cut off the British, or the Allies rather, from the Prussians. He could have still turned Wellington's flank. He could have created gaps here to be exploited. And it's a credit to him, really, that he rallies enough of his division to keep on fighting through the day. After this annihilation by the cavalry early on in the afternoon, they don't give up. They come back for more. They fight to the bitter end.
Yeah, it's several hours slog. This is a long, long battle. But as we know, after the Imperial Guard attack falters, Napoleon loses Waterloo, and obviously is sent off to his 2nd exile. And derlon himself has to go in exile, correct, after Waterloo?
Yeah, absolutely. He's one who had supported Napoleon, and not just supported Napoleon in 1815. In March of 1815, as Napoleon's coming north, derlon actually organized an uprising in the north of France and a mutiny in the army, threatening to march on Paris with his troops to overthrow the Bourbons and support Napoleon. So when the Bourbons come back, they see him not just as an everyday traitor, but as one who had actively tried to take the field against them. So he's a bit like Ney. If he'd been caught, he'd probably have been shot. So he takes himself abroad and lives over in Germany for a few years until eventually the Bourbons calm down and 10 years later give him an amnesty and allow him to come back.
Yeah, and I see re-enters the French military, and I think he still serves in Algeria. What was his later career like?
Yeah, so he's one of these French generals that comes out of the war with a decent reputation, and those reputations grow. By the 1820s and especially into the 1830s, these Napoleonic generals are being revered for what they've done. Okay, the wars might not have ended well, but they conquered everything from Lisbon to Moscow. These are heroes. So as a Bonapartist, he doesn't really get much from the Bourbons. He's allowed to live in France, but nothing else. But after July of 1830, when there's the revolution that overthrows the Bourbons and puts Louis Philippe in place, derlon's honors start to come. He's made a peer of France in 1831. He's given a military district in 1832 and is involved in actually suppressing pro-Bourbon activity. And in 1834, he is made governor of Algeria. So he is seen as a revered general, as a man that they want to give posts to. Unfortunately, a subordinate gets defeated in Algeria in 1835, and derlon kind of takes the fall for this and basically semi-retires after that. He's recalled and goes into retirement. But he goes back to command a military district, which is kind of a semi-honorific post, and he does that till 1843. And in 1843, he's actually made a Marshal of France.
Yeah, and I think that's a lovely, I guess, wrap to a long career. I mean, I could argue that he could have been made one by Napoleon way before then. Don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's one of the generals who it wouldn't have been unusual had he received a baton off Napoleon. Maybe he hadn't had quite enough independent experience, but you could say that about half a dozen others. You could say that certainly about Grouchy, who's made a Marshal in 1815. So for derlon to receive the baton in 1843, I think is a nice touch that just shows how revered he was after the wars and how much his service meant a lot to the French people and to France as a country.
Yeah, indeed. And as you mentioned, there were several generals that did receive the Marshal's baton, Clausel, among a few others, Gerard, after Napoleon's downfall. However, derlon passes in 1844, the year after he gets his baton. What do you think his legacy is?
I think he's seen as a good, solid commander, as one of, Napoleon's probably second tier of generals. He's not spectacular. He's not as charismatic maybe as Ney. He's not a tactical genius like Davout. He's not as outlandish as Murat, but he's in the second tier of very solid generals. He's really the kind of general, I think, that the imperial success was built upon.
Right. Right. I agree with that.
Not the men who are flashy, but the men who do the job, who lead the divisions, who take them into action, and who get those battles won.
Yeah, and can improvise and think on the field as he did at Waterloo to kind of rally your shattered core for another go of it is especially at Waterloo, which all descriptions was a depiction of hell. To organize and rally in that maelstrom is pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed. Well, thank you for that. That was fantastic, Graeme. And again, if you guys would like to check out Graeme's book, Battle, Understanding Conflict from Hastings to Helmand, please go to Amazon or wherever books are sold. And Graeme, I thank you for your time. That was fabulous.
Thanks so much for having me.